Chapter 17. The Fountain of St.Michel. Stepping off the train, I'm seized by dark forebodings, which increase as I descend the station steps and feel the full impact of Paris and all that it spells. My impending fate's written into every stone, every tree, every leaf I scatter with my feet. Wrapped in a black cloud, I head for Roubaixou. If only I didn't have to be again who I was. If only I didn't have to have the same longings, the same feelings. I may as well be wishing not to have to live any longer. It adds up to about the same thing. I think of a line of Whitman. For these are the days which must happen to you. Maybe one day I'll know why they had to happen. Maybe, if there's some kind of a plan to my life, if everything's for a purpose in the end, maybe it all fits. But I can't see the point in anything now. At number 16, Roubaixou, my brother's place, I'm faced with a little note upon the door. In Lisbon until the end of October. I freeze at the sight of it. Now what? No grub, no wine, no welcome, nowhere to sleep, nothing. Rien. Just nothing. Nothing but the streets to go out into, with empty pockets. Selina too, I know, will still be away. I head back down to the Latin Quarter, hands in pockets, eyes on the ground. What am I going to do now? Stay in Paris? Head back south? Retreat to England? I haven't the heart for anything. All that seems to have gone. A dark dread's gnawing away at me and working its way to the surface. Drifting into the company gathered around the fountain, I'm passed a bottle and drink. That takes the edge off my misery. The wind loses its bite, and I begin to glow inside. Darkness has fallen. I'll be needing some more of this liquor. The outlook's too bleak without it. I'll have to do a bit of beggary. And so, with ta passe en bas, s'il te plaît, I'm approaching the passers-by. It's working. I'm getting enough to drink myself into a stupor before wandering off to look for a place to sleep. Not under the bridges, though the river's but a stone's throw from the fountain, for the quays of the Seine are exposed to all kinds of prowlers in the shadows, thieves, perverts, police. Slipping into a doorway on the Rue Bonaparte, I find a cubbyhole under the stairs and curl up and sleep drunkenly. At dawn, I'm awoken by a concierge screaming she's going to call the police. Shouting back at her, "One day, madame, you'll know what it's like to be tired as death and have nowhere to lay your head, because your conscience won't let you rest, you bitch, you mean-hearted, stinking bitch." I become so furious that I nearly strike her. At the counter of a cafe in the Rue Saint-Honoré des Arts, drinking a coffee, I'm shaking with rage. What's becoming of me, that hag can have me screaming at her like a madman? I'm losing sight of myself, I realize, as I stare at the unshaven, uncertain, anxious apparition in the mirror behind the bar. I'm losing sight of myself. I become a regular drinker around the fountain. Certainly not the fountain of life, nor is it the elixir of eternal youth that we drink. It's more like the concoction of eternal damnation, it being the surest way to madness via delirium. It comes in bottles with stars around the neck, sporting such names as Gervais, Préfontaine, La Petite Villageoise. We're a mixed bag, an assorted lot, odds and sods, dregs, straggled around the fountain in every fit and state of drunkenness, like the flotsam and jetsam swirling in a stagnant eddy in the river of humanity that flows along the boulevard St.Michel. Not a man amongst us could be said to have chosen this existence. Remember, my aim as I set out on the glorious road was to find romance and adventure. Not a man amongst us had ever in his past said to himself, "One day, if all works out, I shall flounder about the fountain of St.Michel in a permanently drunken stupor." The wheels of fate have put every man jack of us here. Everyone has a story. I've heard hundreds of them, each one on its 10,000th telling, embellished out of all proportion, though at the kernel of it lies the stark truth, like a clenched fist, and despair where once there'd been a dream. Guy, who fancies himself as some kind of gangster, is about the lowliest type you can find around here. His gangsterism extends little further than the environs of the fountain. He'll swipe your wine, your cigarettes, and anything he can lay his hand on, should he get inside your pocket. I don't like him, and he knows it. Nor does anyone else for that matter. But I've heard a strange story about him, though it's one he never tells himself. During the disturbances of May '68, he'd been a student, had had ideals, and he wasn't afraid to follow them through. But then, snatched from the midst of a crowd by the police, he grasped on his accomplices, and by the time he was released, had undergone a profound personality change. No longer the anarchist locked in deadly combat with capitalism, he's now a self-styled gangster, out to get as much capital for himself as he possibly can. From whom it doesn't matter, rich or poor, it's the same to him. He's known as Guy le Gangster. I've rarely come upon such a sneaky character, and that scar puts me in mind of, well, you remember that geezer in the alley in Montmartre? Yeah, him. By contrast, there's this sensitive-looking soul with a straggly beard and cracked spectacles, who tends to be alone but is often caught up in absurd disputes and sometimes reduced to tears by Guy, who torments him without mercy. Moved to pity, I've stepped in once or twice to defend le prof, as he's known as, usually to grab back the spectacles which Guy snatched off him and is balancing on the end of his nose or threatening to crunch underfoot. "Without those I am lost, really and truly lost," says the poor old fellow tearfully. "I'm lost anyway," he adds. It's not a happy tale he relates to anyone who's prepared to listen, the details of which haunt him. "The moment I came through the door and found them in each other's arms in our bed." He'd been a professor at one of the universities. I forget which one. Somewhere in the south, perhaps Montpellier. "Professor of Greek and Latin, I knew Homer backwards and could recite Virgile. Standing on my head, I was headed straight for the top of my profession. It was everything to me. I had a young wife, beautiful, everything a man could desire. I took her for granted. One of my students looked like this bastard Guy, as though he's returned to haunt me. One of my students took advantage of my wife's neglect. I'd returned home from a lecture early that day. I'd had a headache. Here's Marie. Everyone's after Marie, trying to get her drunk and into her knickers under the bridges. But Marie doesn't drink, and she's trying to stop all of us from becoming alcoholics. It's her mission here at the fountain. It was because of drink she got raped so many times by all those men who gave her money to keep her mouth shut. If she'd been in her right mind, they'd never have got her. "You were a drunken whore, that's what you were," Guy shouts at her, taking the greatest delight in reminding her of what she's trying so hard to forget. "And you don't need to drink any more because you're demented without it." When alone, she sits for hours humming to herself and going through the motions of sewing. "I'm making warm clothes for my man. He's away at the war," she tells me when I ask her what she's doing. "And you, why are you always drinking?" She looks at me with big, bright eyes. I've run into a fellow countryman called John, a youngish man like myself who's found himself in Paris and penniless, a student at St. Martin's College of Art in London. He's decided to quit the academic approach to painting and take up the romantic one, to sleep under the bridges and live on the street. Naturally enough, he's drifted along to the fountain. We get chatting over a bottle of Préfontaine. He too is living by begging, and between us we raise the price of 1 litre more and more swiftly as our mendacity becomes increasingly accomplished. We move further afield over Paris, having a drink on a doorstep on the Rue de Rennes, from which we watch delightedly the dresses of unsuspecting women fly up around their haunches as they pass over the grids on the pavements that blow out hot air from the metro below. We see some pretty sights. Or down by the river, our legs dangling over the quay, watching the laden barges glide up and down and under the bridges whilst we talk of life, of women, of dreams, and that kind of thing. And sometimes we go as far as Montmartre or the Champs-Élysées.